Hello, we are back for the last section of the conference, and we have three great sessions back to back. First up is actually a fireside chat powered by Amber. Amber is one of the longtime supporters of this event. They have been with us since the very first edition, and we're very thankful for that. So we have Mihai Pohontu from Amber and Jari Pekka-Kaleva from EGDF to talk to us about European innovation in games. Guys, take it away.
Perfect. I hope you can hear me.
Absolutely. Hello. Hi, Jari. Nice to see you again.
Hi. Nice to see you again. So yeah, perhaps we should start our short fireside chat, virtually as it is nowadays, like everything, by a short introduction. So I'm Jari Pekka-Kaleva. I work as a COO of the European Games Developer Federation. That is representing the European games industry in Brussels, and of course, organizing different kind of knowledge sharing activities on the European level. And one of the things that we are also tracking very much on are the current industry trends. So I'm very excited to discuss these topics today with Mihai from Amber, who is a very well-known industry pioneer and one of the bright minds building the future instead of just seeing it. So today we have already heard from Ben Mattes from Rovion, giving a certain kind of roadmap for the future, and he was especially focused on AI and game technology more on the market side. But perhaps we should start from another perspective, from the perspective of the future of work and how games industry is a pathfinder of the future, how we are doing business, how we are working. And of course, this year, we all have seen how everything has changed because of COVID-19. And not, of course, to our surprise, games industry has been one of the first to close down. And remote working has been really easily adapted into the industry. And why do you think that is actually, Mihai? Why is the games industry so, agile in innovating new ways of working as it is?
Jari, what a great question. I think the game space is particularly adept at handling creative destruction because almost every year we have to deal with the emergence of new play patterns, platforms, genres, technologies. So I think, if you are not agile in games, you die, quick death. And I think the pandemic, yes, it forced us to be flexible, to adapt to a new environment. And I dare say that most companies have proved very quick at making the best out of a terrible situation, right? So we've seen wholesale companies sometimes with thousands of staff, making an overnight transition to a remote work environment. As it happens, we're well prepared for that. Obviously, most of our technologies are in the cloud for communication and sharing work. So I think the infrastructure supported that naturally. But also, adapting policies and just generally being quick on your feet. I'm very proud of the industry for making this switch. And I think it's a harbinger of things to come, right? I don't think the new normal won't look anything like the old normal. I think the emergence of hybrid work models are here to stay. And I think that's a great thing for the industry.
Yeah, the games industry clearly has been one of the pioneers already before the COVID-19 epidemic really was caused. And especially on the voluntary side, we have seen online mod groups, different kind of virtual groups making game demos, etc. So we kind of had that already existing. And the same applies, I think, also on the other upcoming trends that will disturb the other industries and the way people are working. And one of those is, of course, AI. And 2020s will be the decade of AI, and its use in the games industry will increase dramatically. Of course, it's already used a lot. But from your perspective, Mihai, like, what will be the role of humans when the AI takes over coding, testing, arts, game design, and everything? So on the long vision, of course. Is there still a
What?
room for human creators?
We will be like batteries for the
Yeah.
upcoming AI factories. No, and that's like a Matrix reference, obviously. But I am actually an AI optimist. So what I think that AI will enable us humans to focus on the more creative aspects of our work rather than the more mechanical ones. So I think the accent in the future will be placed on education and in learning the skills to be productive in creative ways. So yes, while we expect large tracts of the game development processes and disciplines that currently exist to be replaced by AI, for example, automation in testing, quality engineering in automation test frameworks will become more prevalent. Procedural generation of assets. AI-enabled level design. These things may become, how should I say, more dominated by AI tool sets, whereas things like, coming up with a creative vision for a game, deciding what the visual target for a set product would be, fine-tuning the experience, innovating in terms of game design, exploring new technologies and scripting the AI itself. The AI will need a lot of human intervention in order to deliver great results. All of these tasks will continue to require the presence of humans, and I think our jobs will become more interesting overall. If you look at the type of work that we do in the industry, we are bound to see jobs that are more fulfilling, more creative, being the norm in the future, compared to the today's environment.
Whenever I hear this kind of fear-mongering stories about AI taking over, I think about actually my mother, who started coding in 1970s with this kind of huge computers with cards in them and everything. And she retired like a few years ago, and during these 4 decades she was coding. How many new tools actually emerged to help her and make her work easier? Of course, it's also led to code becoming in a way a bit crappier from her perspective than it used to be in the good old days. But still, like, I think that's the key with the AI. It's not something that will replace people, but it will be something helping people, helping the games industry professionals to actually work better and more effectively. But of course, there will be lots of these kind of boring tasks that can be uh, outsourced to AI. But before, those things were actually outsourced to the outsourcing companies, and I know that that kind of business model is very important for local games ecosystems around Europe, where there is a smaller studio helping a bigger studio by creating assets for them, or like Amber working with the big productions with a project of tens of millions of euros and making assets for them. So how do you see like the role of AI from this kind of outsourcing perspective, and how it's going to impact the outsourcing markets?
Well, I think a lot of these vendors will have to adapt to, providing services that cater to this AI dominating environment. First of all, there will still be a need for capacity augmentation for the studios that exist. So, for those creative jobs, non-routine, non-mechanical jobs that still need to be performed, there will still be a need for capacity augmentation. So we can see still these vendors or agencies like Amber providing the resources necessary to accelerate the development of a title. But more so, I see an opportunity here for outsourcers to transition more into a technology space, right? We need really robust tools in order to have procedurally generated art or procedurally generated design. And I think there's a role for these outsourcers to become technology providers, or to use existing technology and script that technology in such fashion in order to deliver the assets that that their partners need. Now, as far as Amber is concerned, to take this a little bit more personal, we welcome the AI-enabled future because the core of our business is in building products from concept to launch and then live ops afterwards. So we consider that business will prosper in an AI-enabled environment. One effect though that I see potentially happening here, if we get the AI toolset done right, we won't need teams as large as we currently do. It's common for AAA productions to have hundreds of people. I think that hopefully will disappear, and that will solve a challenge of scale. Even small teams will be able to produce AAA content if their AI toolset is sufficiently robust. And if I find that to be a very exciting development.
Yeah, and that's actually a really important point. If you think it from the perspective of the people working for the industry, it also means that they have to stay ahead of the game with their skills. Like in the future where you have AI, you have to be much more productive. And it's often says that games industry is a really good place for top talent, but you really have to aim to become one of the most one of the best workers on a global level in order to really make it in games industry. So, and also the people in the industry have to constantly innovate the way they are working. And as you described, in the future driven by AI, it's more about taking the new tools in hands and learn the new skills. So how can people working in the games industry stay ahead of the game? And what are the key skills if you are now a student or a young or a new person entering the industry? What to focus on?
Well, clearly, a lot of the skills that are currently being learned in specialized programs will continue to be relevant in the future. So there will always be a place for engineers to create new technology. Maybe they will have bots helping them write code, but the creative task of imagining a game and then executing that in code will largely remain unchanged. It will still require human input in order to innovate. Maybe there will be more templatized formats in which you can just drop in some assets and you have basically a pre-designed game framework that you can utilize, and that democratizes game making even more so than we have seen today, right? But there's still a place for engineers to build tools, to build new game frameworks and designs. There's still a place for artists to set that visual target of the game, right? And to try to innovate and create a new look that hasn't been seen before. And obviously, designers will still have a field day in an environment where they have tools that can enable them to work really fast. And they can create assets really fast. There's almost a boon for creativity and experimentation. So I would say on all these disciplines, it's still worthwhile to pursue the classic path to becoming a game developer, and to continually adapt. I think one thing that will certainly be the case in the future is that you need to have a learning mindset throughout your life. You will never stop learning. The technology will evolve so quickly as we're hurtling towards singularity that it'll force you to continually be learning. It's almost like you will never leave college, right? You'll always have to stay current, and I personally find that very exciting.
Absolutely, and it's also going to be very cross-disciplinary. Like you have to learn the basics of technology and the tools you are working with, like basics of AI. If you are using AI to create content, you also have to, of course, know how your tools work. And same applies to the data skills. More data-driven game design becomes, of course, you have to understand the limitations of data and see where this kind of creative wisdom is really needed. But how about on the company side? As you said, many of the companies have to learn to use the new tools, introduce new AI-driven ways of creating games, develop their own AI, and what kind of that requires resources, and that's something that in Europe comes from the public sector. So how do you see the future of what kind of public support is needed, and what is the role of the private investors on this side?
So if we're talking specifically about Europe, I think Europe has some incredible built-in advantages that will prepare it for the future, and for the disruption brought about by the future. Europe is actually an environment where there are lots of grants. There's available through various European Union programs. There are government sponsors incubators, and university programs in sort of the leading lights of Europe. It's certainly not a uniform environment. We wish we had the government-supported incubators in Romania, for example, or any sort of government support for university programs that cater to the games industry. But we certainly have models. Yeah, you are from Finland. Finland, I think it's a leading light as far as I consider it for all of these aspects. And I think it is absolutely the role of the government to ensure that it is supporting creative industries, and fusing those creative industries with the leading edge of technology, which is what games represent. Games is such an amazing format for innovation, and we spawn technologies that are then increasingly adopted by other industries. And one of the incredible examples here is Unity, right? Unity, it started in Copenhagen, in Denmark, and then of course became a global company, and with a very successful IPO just happened this year. So we're talking here about European spawned global success, right? And I think this may be a harbinger of things to come. That's why it's so exciting to watch Europe. Why? Because the environment that the European Union has created, or the local state governments have created, is one that encourages experimentation. And this is really good for the upcoming disruption, because we will continue to see technologies emerge out of Europe as a result of being able to be in this blue ocean space and to have some funding to explore even crazy ideas, right? But out of like 1,000 crazy ideas, one of them will prove truly transformational. And I think that's when the industry blends into academia, right? There's a good format in Europe to explore that. On the flip side, though, what Europe needs to get better at is supporting its industries to scale. There's not a lot of that happening currently, whereas, there, the perfect example, in my opinion, is what happened in Canada, in Quebec specifically, but in other provinces of Canada afterwards, as well as in Singapore, a massive government intervention to help companies scale through an ambitious program of tax credits that can be applied towards labor costs. Basically, reducing the cost of producing games significantly, making it competitive on a global basis. That is definitely something that Europe needs at scale. And I will
at the moment is also really crucial for the European trade associations to take this into account, because now the funding period in the European Union is changing and the new funding instruments are built up. And if we are able to build up investment instruments through the different EU funding instruments for the local games industry, it will be able to enable us to innovate. We need R&D instruments. As you mentioned, in Finland, those have been developed for years, and they have played a crucial role in the success of the Finnish industry. So now it's for us trade associations really time to act and really time to push this support that is needed for the industry in order to enable its growth and its success in generating tax income for the countries, as well as employing people into newer jobs that are, say, safe for the digital disruption than some of them we have lost now due to pandemic. But if we think about the future on the long run, we already discussed about how this kind of being innovative is one of the strengths of the Europe, and also how we have been successfully transformed we're very agile in transforming to the disruptions. But what are the other advantages for Europe on the road to the Metaverse that was mentioned early by the presentation from Max from Rovio?
Yeah, the road to Metaverse, what a beautiful, kind of almost poetic image, right? And I do think that this is what we're headed towards through all the levers available at our disposal, right? I mean, we can talk about the Metaverse in terms of an all-encompassing sensorial experience that is beamed directly to the human cortex, right, through this emerging concept of neurogaming. But I'll come back to that, and let me cater to your question directly. I think Europe has a great advantage in infrastructure. That's another locus of government investment that is helping spawn industries, on helping industries develop faster. I think on par we have some of the best fiber optic networks in the world, and that is definitely helping shepherd applications that would not be possible in other countries. Also, I think Europe has proven historically extremely adept at a certain type of artistic innovation, a certain type of content innovation, if you want, chiefly rooted in narrative. I think Europe is a very sophisticated place from a cultural perspective. It has always been. It's still very relevant in that frame. And the games created in Europe have often tried to innovate at a narrative level and to tell profound and moving stories that are relevant to the human experience. You find a lot of that coming out of Europe, and there's obviously some notable examples of this. I think Quantic Dream has done a tremendous job in that field and innovating in narrative segment, and we have Remedy as well as a worthwhile, and of course CD Projekt Red, which is an example us in Eastern Europe, like we particularly love to quote, who has pushed forward the RPG genre in significant fashion, and we're all waiting feverishly for Cyberpunk 2077 to come out. But look, those are just a few examples out of many. There's even more radical experimentation happening on the fringes in the indie game space, and I think Europe is well represented there. And last but not least, let's talk about technological innovation, because I touched on this earlier. And I think this is something that is bound to continue to explode out of Europe. I mentioned Unity here, but there are other examples as well. Umbra, Varjo, Superscale, they all try to innovate in their respective fields. And also, I dare say that Europe has started to see some major commercial successes. We are, outside of Unity, we're seeing, Steelfront becoming a major publisher and aggregator of talented studios around the world, but, primarily still focused on Europe. Most of their studios are still in Europe. Quite a bit of aggregation happening with keywords, for example, in the services space. That's another, great example of Europe playing an outsized role in the industry. And
I completely agree on that. So before we go to Catalin and the open questions, there's still one thing I would like to ask from you. And as you said, we are really building at the moment infrastructure, and we have the best minds creating really cutting-edge artistic content, and SMEs and indie studios experimenting with the new technologies created by the European creators. But yeah, the big promise of the neuro interfaces, they're still in this kind of huge machines in hospitals. So what has to happen that we reach that Matrix-like dream that we kind of are in a positive way, utopian way, building here in games industry?
Yeah, so we have a great advantage in Europe in the fact that we can access grants in order to develop this technology, which is still nascent. I mean, I don't expect it to come to full realization until 2030. And that's interesting, because in 2030, you'll have a sort of blending of different technologies coming to the fore. You have neurogaming finally becoming commercially viable by having good means to beam experiences to the human cortex, and create all enveloping sensorial experiences, right? How amazing that will be if done right. But also, the advent of AI that helps with content creation, and also the emergence of new game models. There's this concept of trans reality, where the game becomes inseparable from reality, becomes a component of reality. But that is leading into an even more radical concept of alternate reality, when basically the game becomes completely indistinguishable from reality. And that's why you have, in a context of neurogaming, you can basically be completely transported into a world that you completely inhabit that feels like your absolute reality, and it has the definition, the feel, the smell, the touch of reality. And furthermore, again, by leveraging AI, not just to create the content, but to generate the experience itself, in the most sophisticated form of AI that we can see emerging from 2030, maybe 2040 onwards, is this concept that I personally love that we call synthetic reality, where the metaverse caters to you as an individual, responds to your psyche, to your desires, to your thoughts. So the metaverse becomes a true expression of the self. This individually tailored universe can be extremely transformational and potentially spiritually powerful as well.
So basically, all the technologies explained by Mats in the previous presentation today are just the baby steps of the really bright future we are building. So, Katalin, do we have any questions from the audience?
Thanks, guys, for that very insightful discussion. So we actually have a couple of questions. Mihai kind of already answered the first one, which was what would be Europe's competitive advantage. You already sort of touched on that in your speech. And we have another question from Warren Spector, actually. Hello, Warren. So if AI will allow smaller teams to create AAA content, does that mean A, costs will come down, making innovation more possible because risks are lower? And B, will smaller teams result in smaller studio or more titles coming out?
I like to think that smaller teams will enable studios to have more experimentation and more products coming out in more genres. And it will basically free up creativity. I can tell you that the model that Amber is striding towards is a model where we contain a large number of genre specialized studios. And that gives us a certain diversification that I think it's market savvy, meaning that even if a large number of titles fail because maybe we experimented ahead of the market, or we simply didn't hit the zeitgeist properly, or maybe the quality was not there, we still have options for success among the many studios within our organization. So I think that kind of aggregation of indie studios, a collective of studios that are supporting each other, may be an emerging model that we can see. But certainly, like it is today in the industry, yes, the teams will come together, they will be fiercely independent, and they will be able to produce amazing content with very few people. So I think that is very liberating and democratizing to the industry. The only barrier for us achieving that is the quality of the AI-enabled toolset, which theoretically will be there, theoretically will be impactful, but we haven't realized that yet. So I know, for example, the Unity has an amazing AI research lab in Helsinki. Another awesome feature of the Finnish games industry, and hopefully that innovation will come from the established players with deep pockets, but it may be that the emerging tool set of the future comes from some of these vendors or even startups. And what I would love to see in Europe more is not only government support for scaling, but also the deepening of the venture capital infrastructure to support innovation. Because if you're just anchored into government grants, those are usually fairly small value-wise, and they don't support commercial ambitions very well, right? So we need more of London venture partners. We need more activity from Supercell and other VC firms that are focused on the European game dev environment.
And Supercell is actually a good example also about this question, because their model of having a number of small cells of highly independent teams merely demonstrates that it's not only a successful model of the future, but it's already existing in a number of the companies building being highly successful in the games industry. So yeah, I think it's time for us to say thank you, and
thank you.
The floor for the next panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
And
a pleasure.
Yeah, See you guys hopefully in person next time.
Yeah, hope so.
All right.